Social studies. During their high school years, students need to seriously think about what they want to do after college. There are many choices of jobs for their future. Men are often encouraged to choose majors in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Women are often encouraged to go into teaching or social sciences. The perception is that STEM is simply not a good field for women. Studies show that women make up half of the workforce, but fewer than 25% of women hold STEM jobs. It is important that we begin to understand why more women are not in STEM positions. There is a stereotype that girls do not have as much skill at math as boys. This belief starts at a very young age. Boys are encouraged to be good at math, while girls are encouraged to be good at language. Many young girls are as interested as boys in math and science when they begin school. In fact, studies show that young girls perform as well as boys. However, they are not encouraged to continue pursuing their interests. They are made fun of for doing so by friends, parents, and teachers. Many girls eventually give up on their interest in science and math. Women face tough challenges when they go against all odds to pursue an interest in STEM. The toughest challenge is in entering the job market. This is mainly due to the issue of bias. One study sent identical resumes for a laboratory position. The only difference was that half had a woman's name while the other half had a man's name. Resumes with a male name were believed to be better choices for the job. They were also offered a 12% higher salary. Both students and teachers must be aware of implicit bias within the field of teaching. Unfortunately, many male researchers do not believe that there is a bias against women in STEM. This is even true when presented with research to the contrary. Yet another issue is that there are a limited number of female mentors in STEM fields. With so few women working in the STEM-related job market at present, some newly opened positions may be in men-only boys' clubs. It may be difficult for women to be accepted into the club. The key is to be aware of existing biases. It also benefits both men and women to be aware of just what women are capable of within science. 2 studies found that women were thought less capable by teachers and managers. One of these studies provides evidence that girls' tests are graded more harshly than boys' in physics classes. The other study showed that female programmers in computer science were judged more harshly. So what can be done? It begins with parents and teachers making a point of encouraging girls who are interested in science and math. Also, women cannot be what they cannot see. Many supporters of women in STEM say that providing women with mentorships within their field will prepare women for the future. If a scientist cannot find a mentor, they should join a professional organization. Male hiring managers should be encouraged to attend diversity training in order to learn how to hire and retain women. It is important as well for educators to play a role in encouraging young women to pursue science and math. Everyone must become more aware and more willing to improve his or her view of women in STEM.
History. Located in Eastern Asia, China is a land measuring more than 9 million square kilometers in area today. Ancient China was actually much larger. Enclosed by natural geographical features and bodies of water, China was a difficult land for people to access or for invaders to attack during its ancient days. In fact, for much of its early history, the ancient Chinese believed that they were alone in the world, simply for the reason that they did not encounter many other civilizations often. What are these natural features that protected China from invaders and the rest of the world for such a long time? First, to the north of China were the Gobi and Taklamakan deserts. The Gobi Desert, which stretches 1,200 kilometers between China and Mongolia, is considered to be the driest desert, with less than 200 millimeters of rain per year. In addition, the temperatures vary from minus 40 degrees Celsius in the winter to 50 degrees Celsius in the summer. The Taklamakan Desert in northwest China stretches 1,000 kilometers. It is often referred to as the Sea of Death because it has little water, dangerous sandstorms, and poisonous snakes. In addition to its deserts, a land feature protecting China to the south is the Himalayan mountain range, stretching 2,400 kilometers. Not only does the Himalayan mountain range include Mount Everest, the highest peak in the world, but the range also includes 9 more of the tallest mountain peaks in the world. The Himalayan mountain range is very difficult not only to climb, but also to pass through. In fact, the mountains virtually form a wall to the south of China. Along with deserts in the north and mountains in the south, China is surrounded by water on the east, namely the Yellow Sea, China Sea, and Pacific Ocean. Those who wanted to access China from the east would only be able to do so by ship, which would have been impossible during ancient times as the seas and oceans were too wide and difficult to cross. Isolated as it was from other civilizations, China developed virtually independent of the rest of the ancient world. Besides the Mongols, who lived in the deserts to the north and only began their threats to invade China in 1000 AD, the ancient Chinese had little knowledge of the other ancient civilizations that existed beyond their borders, such as the ancient Greeks or the ancient Romans or the ancient Egyptians. In fact, they had no knowledge of the ancient Indus Valley civilization that existed around the same time, even though they were only separated by the Himalayan mountain range. Therefore, the ancient Chinese were free to develop and expand with a sense of security and little fear of outside invaders. Another advantage of this isolation is that it also helped to protect the Chinese language, culture, ideology, and religion from influence by outside contact. However, there were also clear disadvantages to this isolation as well. For example, with no knowledge of other civilizations, there was no ability for the exchange of information or ideas. While this protected their own culture and beliefs, it also limited their exposure to other views of the world. In addition, there was no opportunity for the exchange of goods. They had to be self-sufficient and rely only on the inventions of their own people and the resources of the land. It was not until about 200 BC that the ancient Chinese became aware of their neighbors and other civilizations. This knowledge led to the development of the Silk Road, which became a channel for transport and trade. It was a vast network of routes that stretched 4,000 kilometers and connected Asia to Europe. These routes were first used during the 2nd century BC and remained important channels of trade for more than 1,500 years. The merchants would travel in caravans and use camels for transport. Cities along the route of the Silk Road were used as stops for rest and water. Through the Silk Road, the Chinese were able to export silk, salt, spices, and other goods in exchange for commodities such as cotton, ivory, silver, and gold. More importantly, the Silk Road linked China to the outside world and allowed for the trade of ideas, culture, and inventions. The natural barriers of the land served their purpose in helping the civilization of ancient China to grow and expand while protecting it from invaders. And today, these barriers serve as interesting sites for tourists to explore when they visit China.
Psychology. Hysteria is a term used to describe people who react in an extreme way due to fear or anger. It is usually a result of an irrational belief. Mass hysteria is a state in which a group of people all suffer from violent mental trouble at the same time. There have been many documented cases throughout history. One example of a long-lasting event is the Salem witch trials of 1692. Cases of mass hysteria typically occur within small, isolated groups of people that are in a difficult environment. Colonies in New England were small, far apart, and extremely religious. Ministers of the time constantly warned members of their churches of the devil walking among them. The village of Salem had many problems. Their difficulties were made worse due to a smallpox epidemic. In addition, the colonies feared attacks from Native American tribes. It all began when two young girls began screaming and convulsing one evening in January 1692. They hid behind furniture and lay on the floor in pain. They also complained of fever. Several other girls soon developed the same problems. A doctor came and gave a physical evaluation. However, he found no evidence that anything was physically wrong with them. Eventually, the doctor concluded that the girls were under the spell of a witch. The people of the town believed that only a witch could have cast a spell on the girls. The girls accused 3 women of placing spells on them: Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba. Sarah Good was a homeless woman. She often had to ask for a place to sleep and for food from kind people in the town. Sarah Osborne was an elderly lady in the community. She rarely went to church. They both denied any practice of witchcraft. Tituba was a Caribbean slave who worked for the minister. She probably confessed to save herself from being found guilty in a trial. She soon accused others of helping her. Tituba said that the devil came to her to help lead the people in the village into doing evil. This confession is what helped expand the hunt for witches and kept it going for almost a year. Hysterical fear settled into everyone in the village. After Tituba accused women of being witches, others were soon also named. In May 1692, the governor called a special court together to hear the witchcraft cases. Judges were not trained to deal with such things. They relied on ministers to help them understand all matters relating to witchcraft. Cotton Mather was a respected minister who asked the court not to derive their conclusions from evidence such as dreams and visions. The court ignored his request. In addition, people accused of being witches were not allowed to have professional legal help. Likewise, they could not call witnesses for themselves or ask for any rulings to be examined by a higher court. The court also allowed gossip and speculation without providing any hard evidence. The witch hunt began in Salem and surrounding towns. The accused were brought to Salem to be put on trial. In June, the courts found guilty their first witch, Bridget Bishop, who was hanged at Gallows Hill in Salem town. 10 more people were hanged in July and August. 8 people were hanged in September. When the trials were finally over, 19 people had been hanged. One man who refused to confess to being a witch was slowly killed by having large stones piled on his chest. 7 people died in prison while waiting to be hanged. By May of the following year, the mass hysteria started to lose steam. All of the villagers accused of witchcraft were let out of prison without having to go to trial. Historians speculate that the witch trials could have been the result of bad feelings between neighbors. Many of the accused were wealthy or of a different religion. Others believe that it may have been a kind of trick of the young girls gone wrong. Some historians believe that the strange actions of the young girls were caused by eating the fungus ergot. Scientists say that this fungus could have caused the girls violent convulsions, strange visions, and pain. There is no way to deny that the trials remain an unfortunate dark chapter in America's history. Social studies. Laws are rules of conduct or action that are used in towns, states, cities, and countries to govern the behavior of people. Laws are very important because they help to protect people from things that may be dangerous or harmful, and they help establish guides for how to live. Most laws are useful and focus on safety, but some are just strange. For example, in Alaska, it is against the law to look at a moose from an airplane. In New York, it is illegal for a blind person to drive a car. In Hollywood, it is not legal to herd more than 3,000 sheep down the middle of the street. And if you visit Oklahoma, don't stick your tongue out at a dog. It is illegal to make funny faces at dogs. America is not the only country with strange laws. In Granville, France, it is illegal for elephants to go to the beach. In Venice, Italy, it is a crime for individuals to feed birds. And in Thailand, stepping on money is a crime. At first glance, these laws seem strange and without reason. But closer inspection can show that there are reasons why they exist in the context where authorities made them. In Alaska, many people hunt moose, and sometimes hunters would rent airplanes to fly high above the forests to find areas with many moose. This was bad because too many moose were killed. So the law about not looking at moose from airplanes is directed toward hunters who have a potential impact on the moose population more than it is to other visitors to Alaska. The law about blind drivers in New York has to do with degrees of blindness. Many times, we think that blind people cannot see anything at all. However, there is a range of vision within the definition of blindness. In the context of this law, a person can see shapes, shadows, and some light, and still be considered blind. It is these drivers that this law is for. The people that can see a little, but not enough to safely drive a car. What about the sheep on the streets of Hollywood? Back before Hollywood became famous for its movie studios, it was right in the middle of farming country. Sheep farmers in the community would move their sheep from one side of Los Angeles to the other so the animals could graze on fresh grass. If farmers moved too many sheep, the streets became considerably crowded and dirty, so the city set a limit of 3,000 animals per day. The problem in France was animal-related as well. France used to have many circuses that would travel the country for entertainment. The circus animals would often be taken to the beach and washed in the ocean. Smaller animals were not a problem, but elephants would drop dung on the beaches, making a big and stinky mess. Speaking of smelly messes, there was a similar reason behind Venice's law against feeding birds. The birds would drop bombs on everything and everybody, making streets, buildings, and people very dirty. In response to this problem, the bird law was passed, and the amount of bird waste was significantly reduced. Thailand made stepping on money illegal for cultural reasons. Thai money, called baht, has pictures of their king on it. Thai people are very traditional. They love and respect their king, so they feel that stepping on money is like stepping on a picture of their king. It is very disrespectful conduct. Even though laws are meant to protect and help us, it is not always clear why specific laws exist. Even strange laws have their reasons if we look hard enough. But the law against making a funny face at a dog? That's just crazy. How about taking that one off the books? History. There isn't a person without a name. After all, it is the main means of identifying or addressing a person. Though given names have been common from the beginning of time, surnames have not. In fact, some people do not have surnames even in the present day. For example, the people of Tibet, Myanmar, Java, and East Africa typically do not use a surname or family name. According to legend, the Chinese were the first people to use a surname. It was Emperor Fu Xi in 2852 BC who began the use of surnames in order to count the number of people in his empire. However, other countries did not use surnames until much later. For example, Great Britain began using surnames only in the 13th and 14th centuries. Japan's use of surnames came even later in the 19th century. Although the need for a surname became important at different times in different places, the reason for the surname across cultures is very similar. Before modern times, people lived in small villages or neighborhoods where everyone knew each other. there was no need to have a surname. However, when the population increased, people needed to be able to tell the difference between individuals with the same given name. A surname would show who a person's parents were or what clan they belonged to. For example, Jones is the common short form for John's son. The S at the end of a surname, like Jacobs or Andrews, would also indicate that the person was someone's son. Place surnames were also common. A person who lived near a lake might have the surname Locke. Similarly, a person from Ness might have the surname Van Ness, which would mean from Ness. Sometimes, surnames were based on the person's looks. A person with the surname Reed would have red hair. Other such surnames are Young, Strong, or Little. Finally, a surname might be based on the work a person does. A person with the last name Miller would have worked at a mill. The surname Smith would have come from a person who worked with metals. In Western cultures, the surname is usually attached to the end of the given name. For this reason, many people in the West refer to the surname as the last name. However, in some Asian cultures, the surname is placed before the given name. This may be because the family or clan carries more importance than the individual in those countries. The significance of this surname, and whether women change it or not after marriage, differs around the world. Many women in Western countries will typically take their husband's surnames after marriage. This is because when a woman gets married, she is then considered a member of her husband's family. These days, women cite love or family unity in addition to tradition as reasons for changing their last name. On the other hand, there are a handful of countries where the idea of a woman taking the last name of her husband is a foreign concept. Greece, for example, made a law in 1983 requiring women to keep their own last name for reasons of gender equality. Belgium, the Netherlands, and France are some other countries where women must legally retain their own surname. Though not a law, it is typical in some countries to retain one's surname. These countries include Malaysia, Spain, Chile, and Korea. In fact, in Korea, a woman will usually not even marry someone of the same surname unless the person has different roots. The origin, meanings, order, and significance of the surname are both interesting and rich in history. To find out more about one's own family history, a person just needs to look at his or her surname.
Art and literature. One of the most important pieces of music in every culture is the country's song, the national anthem. Over the past 300 years, when a country gained its freedom, the national anthem has typically been one of the first things to be established. It is an essential aspect of creating a country's unique identity. The main purpose of the national anthem is simple. It is to unite the people of a nation and create a sense of pride. Thus, the construction of both the music and words is specifically chosen to produce feelings of unity and pride among the people of a country. There are usually 4 types of music associated with national anthems. The first style is the march. National anthems that are typical of a march usually have a strong, regular rhythm. The name march is appropriate since march music was originally written to involve the military and the military band. Drums are an important and commonly used instrument in this style. The second style is the hymn. National anthems that have hymn forms are usually written as something like a prayer. The music and words may speak to God or the country's land. For example, Jamaica's national anthem begins, "Eternal Father, bless our land." The third style is similar to opera. This style of national anthem is typical of Latin American countries where the music is dramatic in nature. The final style is fanfare. The music of national anthems with this style is usually brief and ceremonial. The common instrument is usually horns or other similar wind instruments. The words of a country's national anthem are usually in the country's national or official language. If a country has more than one official language, then the national anthem may have two versions of the song. For example, Canada's national anthem has lines in both English and French. When it is sung, the anthem is usually a mixture of both the English and French parts. South Africa has 11 official languages. Its national anthem includes lines with 5 of the 11 languages. A national anthem in the many languages of a country can encourage unity among all the people of the country. In almost all of the national anthems, the words themselves usually speak of the people's history and traditions. It might also speak of the struggles the people overcame to become a nation. For example, some common words found in many anthems are free, land, God, home, and unity. Curiously, some national anthems do not have any words at all. Spain's national anthem does not have any official words. The frequency of use of the national anthem is different in every country. For example, in Colombia, it is the law that the national anthem is played every day on the radio and television at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Similarly, the Thai policy requires the national anthem to be played over media and public speakers throughout every city every day at 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. In addition, Thai children will stand and sing the national anthem while raising the Thai flag at the start of each school day. However, in the U.S., the anthem is usually only played at public sporting events or special public gatherings. The Olympics is one occasion where one can hear many national anthems, since the national anthem for the gold medal participant is played at every medal ceremony. No matter when or where the national anthem is played, anthems usually stir listeners' pride for the nation. Anthems also command respect. This is why most countries will require or request their citizens to pause, stand at attention, or place their hand over their hearts as a sign of respect, devotion, and loyalty. To disrespect the national anthem would be to disrespect the country, its people, and its principles.
Passage 1. Animal music.
It has long been said that music is universal, but now science is proving just how deeply true that statement really is. Like most people, scientists cannot define exactly what music is, but they know it when they hear it. One group of scientists has shown that human appreciation of music may be shared by whales, birds, and even rats, that it is remarkably ancient, and that studying why animals and humans appreciate music may help us better understand how the brain works. In research published in the journal Science, several scientists have shown that in very basic ways, other species share music appreciation, and that this appreciation may be one of humanity's oldest activities. Through such research, scientists hope they may come to understand the human mind better. Perhaps they will even learn key information about how to deal with damage to the auditory system. Jelle Adema is a biologist and co-author of one of the science papers. Like several of the researchers involved in the science papers, Adema is both a scientist and a musician. In addition to his work in biology, he plays the flute. He has carefully made exact copies of ancient bone flutes in order to play them. He wants to determine the kinds of sounds that early humans may have made. Do musical sounds in nature reveal a profound bond between all living things? Asks one of the papers. There is a lot of evidence that perhaps it does. For example, the general structure of whale music is remarkably similar to that of human music. Indeed, the songs of one type of whale follow many of the same precise rules that are nearly universal in human music. The two species share a similar tonal scale, and their songs involve the introduction and variation of a central theme. Many species of birds sing in ways that also follow the rules of human song. They use note scales similar to those used by humans, even though an endless variety of such scales is possible. Among some species, songs are passed from one generation to another or are shared by a group of peers. And some birds even intentionally look for objects that can be used as instruments and then play them. For example, one type of bird uses a hollow log as a drum, beating on it with a small stick it breaks off from a tree. There is also evidence that music played an important part in early human history. For example, 40,000-year-old flutes have been found in northern Europe. Referring to early humans, Adama says, to see that they spent so much time making instruments means music was important to them. The ability to make music, some scientists believe, may even be older than language. Mark Jude Tramo, a neurologist, says he is fascinated by the complexity of the human brain's reaction to music. There is no music center in the brain, he wrote. Almost every thinking part of the brain is involved in listening to music, and when we move to the music, many of the areas controlling movement are involved too. Imagine how much of the brain lights up when we dance. Tramo sees the research on music as a process that will lead to a better understanding of how the brain works. By learning exactly how the brain processes and understands the specific features that music is made of, a more complete understanding of how the brain makes sense of the world around us may develop. Other scientists are conducting similar research on how the brain reacts to visual arts. One of their motivations is to understand how the human visual system works. Tramo believes that understanding is going to help scientists in their efforts to help the deaf to hear and help the blind to see.
Passage 2. Human's best friend.
Most of us are familiar with the saying, dogs are man's best friend. But is the feeling mutual? Do dogs consider humans their best friends? Recent research could provide an answer. The latest scientific evidence shows that dogs likely evolved from wolves much earlier than was thought before, perhaps as many as 35,000 years ago. This gives support to the theory that humans and dogs evolved together. According to the theory, humans were involved in the evolution of dogs, and dogs were involved in the evolution of humans. This is called coevolution. A key piece of evidence for coevolution is the fact that humans and dogs share a surprising number of genes. And some of those genes are involved in behavior. One similarity between human and dog behavior is the frequency and purpose of eye contact. Researchers noticed that dogs spend a lot of time looking at their owner's eyes. From a scientific point of view, this was very surprising. Why? Direct, sustained eye contact signals aggression in most animals, including wolves, dogs' ancestors. For dogs, in contrast, gazing into their owner's eyes does not lead to aggression. Rather, it appears to signal a close, trusting bond with their human companions. But why would dogs' behavior be so different from that of other species? Researchers thought that it might be related to the hormone oxytocin. Oxytocin is often called the love hormone. Why? It is released when people hug or gaze deeply into each other's eyes, and it produces pleasurable feelings. The connection between sustained eye contact and the production of oxytocin is particularly important to the establishment of a strong bond between human parents and their newborn babies. To test this idea, scientists measured the levels of oxytocin in dogs and their human companions before and after they gazed at one another. They found an increase in oxytocin in both the dogs and the humans. And the longer the dogs and humans looked at each other, the more oxytocin was produced in both. Scientists then performed this same experiment with wolves that were raised by and lived with humans from birth. Interestingly, they found that the wolves did not gaze back at the human parents who had raised them, and there was no increase in oxytocin production. This difference between wolves and dogs was striking. For a long time, researchers believed that dog behavior resembled the behavior of their genetic ancestors, wolves. Is it possible that due to coevolution, dog behavior is actually closer to human behavior? To answer this question, researchers turned to another area of study, the ability to read body language, including facial expressions. In an experiment at the University of Veterinary Medicine, Vienna, scientists taught dogs to distinguish between happy and angry faces. After training, the dogs could very easily tell the difference between pictures of happy and angry people that they had never seen before. This is evidence of another similarity in human and dog ability and behavior. Yet another experiment shows how similar dogs are to human children. Researchers found that dogs perform tasks better when their owners are in the room with them. This is similar to the way that human children behave. In the experiment, dogs played with toys under 3 conditions: when their owners were present and talking to them, when their owners were present but silent, and then when their owners were not present. The dogs played with their toys much more when their owners were present, regardless of whether the owners spoke or not. However, when their owners were not present, the dogs were much less likely to play with their toys. They did not seem to be interested in performing for strangers. The conclusion? Similar to human children, dogs are much more likely to perform tasks successfully for their human parents, their owners, than for strangers. What can we conclude from all of this research? The fact that humans commonly refer to dogs as man's best friend reveals the human point of view. However, is the feeling mutual? Based on the evidence available at the moment, the answer appears to be yes.
Passage 3. The Mind of the Chimpanzee.
In the middle of the 1960s, Beatrice and Alan Gardner started a project that, along with other similar research, taught us a lot about the chimpanzee mind. They bought an infant chimpanzee and began to teach her the signs of ASL, the American Sign Language used by many of the deaf in Canada and the United States. The Gardners achieved remarkable success with their student, Washoe. Not only did she learn signs easily, but she quickly began to put them together in meaningful ways. It was clear that when she saw or used a sign, she formed a picture in her mind of the object it represented. If, for example, she was asked in sign language to get an apple, she would go and find an apple that was out of sight in another room. When news of Washoe's achievements were first announced to the scientific community, there was a lot of protest. The results of the research implied that chimpanzees had the ability to learn a human language and suggested that chimps might possess intellectual skills similar to those of humans. Although many were fascinated and excited by the Gardners' discoveries, many more bitterly criticized the whole project. The controversy led to many other language projects, and the resulting research provided additional information about the chimpanzee's mind. The fact that chimpanzees have excellent memories surprised no one. So it was not particularly remarkable when Washoe gave the name sign of Beatrice Gardner, her surrogate mother, after a separation of 11 years. Actually, it was no greater an achievement than the memory of dogs who recognize their owners after separations of almost as long. Chimpanzees also possess pre-mathematical skills. They can, for example, easily tell the difference between more and less. They can put things into specific categories according to a particular characteristic. Therefore, they have no difficulty in separating a pile of food into fruits and vegetables at one time and at another dividing the same pile of food into large and small, even though this calls for putting some vegetables with some fruits. Chimpanzees who have been taught a human language can combine signs creatively in order to describe objects for which they have no sign. Washoe, for example, puzzled the people taking care of her by asking many times for a rock berry. Eventually they discovered that she was referring to a sweet type of nut that she had been given for the first time a short time before. Another language-trained chimp described a cucumber as a green banana, and another referred to an Alka-Seltzer as a listen drink. They can even invent signs. One chimp had to be put on a leash when she went outside. One day, ready to go outside but having no sign for leash, she showed what she wanted by holding a bent finger to the ring on her collar. This sign became part of her vocabulary. Some chimpanzees love to draw and especially paint. Those who have learned sign language sometimes give a name to their artwork. This apple, or sweet corn, or bird, or whatever. The fact that the paintings often look, to our eyes, remarkably different from the objects themselves either means that the chimpanzees are not very good artists, or that we have a lot to learn about chimpanzee art. People sometimes ask why such complex intellectual powers have evolved in the chimpanzee when their lives in the wild are so simple. The answer is, of course, that their lives in the wild are not so simple. They use and need all their mental skills during normal everyday life in their complex society. Chimpanzees always have to make choices, where to go, or with whom to travel. They need highly developed social skills, particularly males who want to become leaders. And low-ranking chimpanzees must learn to hide their intentions or do things in secret if they want to survive. Indeed, the study of chimpanzees in the wild suggests that their intellectual abilities evolved over thousands of years to help them deal with daily life. It is easier to study intellectual skill in the lab where, through carefully designed tests and the proper use of rewards, chimpanzees can be encouraged to stretch their minds to the limit. It is more meaningful to study the subject in the wild, but much harder. It is more meaningful because we can better understand the environmental pressures that led to the evolution of intellectual skills in chimpanzee societies. It is harder because, in the wild, almost all behaviors are complicated by endless variables. Years of observing, recording, and analyzing replace planned testing. The number of research subjects can often be counted on the fingers of one hand. The only experiments are nature's own, and only time, eventually, may lead to their being repeated.
Passage 1. Expression of emotion.
In the northwest of Canada, there is a group of people called the Utkuikalingmute, or Utku. According to anthropologist Jean L. Briggs, author of the book Never in Anger, the Utku have no real word in their language for anger. And even more remarkable, adults rarely seem to get angry. The word that they use to describe the angry behavior of foreigners translates not as anger, but rather as childishness. Similarly, the Ifaluk people of Micronesia seem to rarely get angry. However, in contrast to the Utku, they talk about anger all the time and have many words to describe it. They consider anger to be evil, a demon in fact, and fear it. The expression of grief and gratitude is central to the Kaululi culture of Papua New Guinea.
In contrast, people from the United States generally spend very little time talking about grief or gratitude. Research on American males shows that they are particularly uncomfortable expressing these emotions. What is going on here? Aren't we all human beings? Don't we all feel the same basic emotions? This is a topic that philosophers, scientists, religious leaders, and anthropologists, among others, have been arguing about for centuries. Most researchers today believe that a limited number of emotions are universal. However, there is not complete agreement on which emotions humans indeed share. Fear and anger are almost always included. Guilt, joy, shame, disgust, and surprise are also considered by many to be universal. But then, how can we explain the utku and the ifalak? Dr. Robert C. Solomon, professor of philosophy at the University of Texas at Austin, has argued that emotions are, at least in part, culture-specific. In one essay, he says that even among people from the same culture, it is difficult to get agreement on what an emotion is. For example, most anthropologists would not consider love to be an emotion. But if it is not an emotion, then what is it? Another challenge is how to determine that two people are indeed feeling the same emotion. You can observe people's behavior and ask them to describe their emotions, but it is impossible to directly observe what they are feeling. This becomes even more complex when you are trying to compare emotions across cultures. We tend to associate certain behaviors with specific emotions, but of course our associations are based on what those behaviors mean in our own culture. For example, imagine you are a teacher in the United States with a student from another country. Your student has failed the class. You learn that his behavior has changed. Suddenly, he is avoiding his friends and spending all of his time alone. If you are from the United States, you will probably describe his emotional state as depressed. Why? In U.S. culture, there is a belief that people who suddenly change their behavior and avoid other people are often depressed. However, if you have some knowledge of the student's culture, you might recognize his behavior as an expression of deep shame at disgracing his family. Of course, this example is very simple. It does not mean that people from your student's culture do not ever experience depression, or that people from the United States do not feel shame. However, can someone from a culture that does not place the same value on family honor really understand this deep feeling of disgrace? In other words, is shame really the same emotion in all cultures? Another reason to believe that not all emotions are universal is the fact that different languages characterize emotions in different ways. For instance, in the ancient Indian languages of Sanskrit and Bengali, emotions are described as being either sattva, lightness, rajas, movement, or tamas, heaviness. Interestingly, two of the examples of sattva, cheerfulness and nobility, are not generally considered to be emotions in English. Is this just a language difference? Or does it reveal that people across cultures do not share a similar emotional experience? The mystery of whether emotions are universal or culturally specific is one that most likely will never be solved. That probably contributes to our fascination with the subject.
Passage 2. Catching other people's emotions.
You wake up one day with a fever and a bad cough. Should you go to work? In the past, many employers would likely have said yes. Going to work even when you were sick showed your commitment to your job and was considered a virtue. Missing work for any reason was frowned upon. Nowadays, however, employers would probably agree that the proper decision in this case would be to stay at home. After all, it is better for one sick employee to miss a day or two than to pass the illness on to everyone in the office. But now imagine this situation. You wake up in a bad mood. Should you be concerned about passing your mood on to your coworkers? According to psychologist and writer Daniel Goleman, the answer is yes. In his recent book, Social Intelligence, The New Science of Relationships, Goleman explains that our brains are social tools. That is, the human brain was designed for social interaction. Research shows that the human brain contains cells called mirror neurons. According to Goleman, these neurons allow us to sense both the move another person is about to make and their feelings, and instantaneously prepare us to imitate that movement and feel with them. Goleman goes on to say that mirror neurons link brain to brain. If you put a person in a meeting who is either purposely upbeat or downbeat, it changes the whole group's collective mood for better or worse. One example of passing one's emotions on to others is through laughter. One person starts laughing out loud, and even though we have no idea what the person is laughing at, we begin to laugh as well. When people are alone, on the other hand, they rarely laugh out loud, even when they read or hear a very humorous joke. This suggests that laughter is meant to be shared. When someone laughs out loud, it is easy to recognize his or her emotional state. But most emotions are not expressed in such an obvious way. How are we able to recognize them? Brain research has shown that our ability to sense others' emotions is in our genes. We may not be conscious of it, but we are particularly good at reading others' facial expressions. Even the most reserved people reveal some emotion on their faces. For example, a movement as small as a raised eyebrow can communicate a world of information. Psychologist Paul Ekman is considered the world's leading expert on facial expressions. He has spent years identifying the muscle movements that make up the thousands of facial expressions that we use to communicate our emotions. Interestingly, Ekman's research has revealed that our facial expressions are not only a mirror of what we are feeling. Sometimes, just making a facial expression can cause us to experience a particular emotion. For example, if you're in a bad mood, but put on an artificial smile, you will start to feel better faster. In other words, sometimes the facial expression actually starts the emotional process rather than the other way around. So if you greet someone with a cheerful expression on your face, both of you will be more likely to feel cheerful. Now let's return to our worker who wakes up in a bad mood. What should he do? The decision might depend on the workplace. If the atmosphere is generally positive, he should get up and go to work. It is more likely that he will catch the positive mood of others than that he will pass on his negative mood. And if he smiles despite his bad mood, he will have an even greater chance of recovery. On the other hand, if the workplace atmosphere is negative, it might mean that he's already caught the negative feelings of his coworkers. In that case, it might be a good idea for him to start looking for another job. And now that he understands how emotions are passed from one person to another, he should be more choosy about where he works. He should look for a healthy workplace where he is unlikely to catch negative feelings from his coworkers. At the same time, he should be more conscious of the effect that his own emotional state has on his coworkers. As Goleman says, mirror neurons make us far more neurally connected than we ever knew. This creates a pathway for emotional contagion. If you really care about people, it gives a new spin to the term social responsibility. What emotional states are you creating in the people you're with?
Passage 3. Microexpressions.
Dr. Paul Ekman has been named one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. He is an expert in nonverbal communication, including gestures and facial expressions. One of his many achievements was the discovery of microexpressions. Microexpressions are facial expressions that flash across the face and then disappear in less than a second. Microexpressions cannot be consciously controlled, and they happen so fast that most people do not even see them. Dr. Ekman was also involved in developing a tool for identifying the range of human facial expressions, the Facial Action Coding System, FACS. While all of Dr. Ekman's work is fascinating, one area has received a lot of attention: using facial expressions to detect lies. Many of us believe that we can tell when someone is lying. However, research shows the opposite. Most of us are very bad at it. According to Ekman and other experts, only a very small percentage of the population, less than 1%, is gifted at identifying liars. Researchers working with Dr. Ekman have developed 3 tests to determine a person's lie detection abilities: an opinion test, a crime test, and an emotion test. For each test, the researchers made short videotapes of people either lying or telling the truth. The test taker then watches the recordings to see if he can identify the liars. In the opinion test, half of the people were lying about their opinions. In the crime test, half were lying about stealing $50. In the emotion test, half were lying about their feelings. To be considered gifted, or a wizard, the term used by Ekman and other researchers, the test taker must score at least 90% on the opinion test and at least 80% on the other 2 tests. After testing approximately 20,000 individuals over more than 30 years, researchers have only identified about 50 wizards. And what about the other people who took the tests? Most people scored 50% or lower, almost the same result they would get if they were guessing. However, a small percentage of individuals scored 80% or higher on at least one of the tests, while doing poorly on the others. The test that they scored highly on was almost always related to their profession. For example, more police officers scored well on the crime test, while a higher percentage of therapists did well on the emotion test. This is understandable. After all, experience in a profession should lead to the development of skills related to that field, shouldn't it? Surprisingly, however, most people did not even score well on the test related to their profession. So, how do the wizards do it? According to Dr. Ekman, when people are hiding the truth, their faces leak information. That is, their facial muscles move in ways that a wizard or someone with special training can detect. For example, anger is an emotion with a characteristic feature, a tightening of the lips. However, the micro-expression for anger flashes so quickly across the face that you can easily miss it. Also, people often smile when they attempt to hide anger. This makes it even harder to catch that brief tightening of the lips before the smile. Wizards, however, are able to identify and interpret these micro-expressions immediately. That is how they can tell when someone is lying. Imagine how useful this information could be to the police. Police officers often have only a few seconds to calculate the danger of a situation. Sometimes a simple incident, such as stopping a speeding vehicle, can become violent if the police officer misreads the driver's intentions. During this type of incident, an officer's ability to recognize the difference between a real smile and one that hides rage is extremely valuable. It can help prevent tragedies, including serious injury and even death. Or imagine that you are falsely accused of a crime. Wouldn't you want to be able to call in a wizard to read the truth on your face and stand by you during the legal process? Although less than 1% of us are natural wizards, Dr. Ekman believes that with enough motivation and practice, almost anyone can be trained to see and correctly interpret micro-expressions. To prove his point, Ekman developed a training tape with 40 examples of facial expressions. The first time most people watch the tape, they cannot see any of the microexpressions. However, after just 30 minutes of practice and instruction, they can see all of them. And after several days of training, most people are able to not only see, but also interpret microexpressions successfully. However, identifying and successfully interpreting microexpressions does not tell you what someone is lying about. It only tells you that the person is lying about something. To find out exactly what happened during a crime, for example, interpreting microexpressions is only one tool among many that can be used. In 2004, Dr. Ekman retired from his position as professor of psychology at the University of California, UCSF, Medical School, and started his own company, the Paul Ekman Group, PEG. PEG conducts trainings all over the world and also develops online interactive training tools. PEG's clients have included police departments, the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, healthcare professionals, security organizations, and business leaders. Interestingly, there are also many individuals who take the training to improve their personal relationships.
Passage 1. The Life of a Scientist.
The attractive, well-dressed woman holds up a pair of gloves. There seems to be nothing remarkable about them. But there is a story behind these gloves. It involves a war, a little girl who wanted to be a housewife, a determined mother, a talented student, 3 prestigious universities, and a unique ability to see the big picture. Jung-hwa Choi was born in 1946 in Seoul, Korea. The only girl in a family of 4 children, Choi lost her father in the Korean War. Her mother went to work as a nurse to support her family. In Korea at that time, it was unusual for a woman to work outside the home, and as a child, Choi was very sensitive to her mother's absence. Although an excellent student, she resisted her mother's attempts to interest her in a career in medicine. She knew exactly what she wanted to do with her life, and it did not involve medical school. Choi's dream was to be a stay-at-home wife and mother. Choi's mother, however, was determined that her children attend university. Choi agreed, but with one condition: she would not study medicine. She would study home economics. Choi entered prestigious Seoul National University and did very well in her studies. Her professors encouraged her to go on to graduate school, but with no intention of having a career, Choi was not interested. Fate, however, had different plans. While Choi waited for a suitable husband to appear, she took a job with the government as a child welfare worker. But after she had been at her job for only 6 months, one of her former professors offered her a job as an assistant in the Department of Home Economics. It was an interesting opportunity, and she accepted. Choi spent almost 5 years in the department. While she was there, she learned a lot about clothing and textiles. Reading through international publications, she became fascinated by a field that did not even exist in South Korea at that time: clothing physiology. Clothing physiology is the study of the biological function or work of clothing. Specifically, how clothing can contribute to or interfere with the healthy functioning of the human body. Although she had always dreamed of being a wife and mother, Choi accepted the fact that perhaps it was not her fate to marry. She therefore began to look for a graduate program where she could study clothing physiology. Japan seemed to be the best choice. She taught herself as much Japanese as she could by reading textbooks and looking through Japanese fashion magazines, and in January 1973 left South Korea for Japan. Choi expected that it would be at least a year before she would be ready to take the demanding Japanese university entrance exam. To her surprise, however, she passed after only 2 months of study. In March 1975, just 2 short years after her arrival in Japan, Choi graduated with a degree in clothing physiology from prestigious Nara Women's University. She then went on to get a PhD from the School of Medicine at Kobe University in Kobe, Japan. As her research topic, Choi examined how Korean traditional clothing compares to Western clothing in 2 ways: thermal adaptability, how well the clothing allows the body to control temperature, and mobility, how well the clothing suits the wearer's movement. Choi's research confirmed that Korean traditional clothing, while beautiful, did not perform very well on a physiological level. In September 1979, Choi returned to Seoul National University, this time as an assistant professor in the same department where she had studied and worked years before. She has since done important research on the effects of clothing on the wearer's quality of life. She and her research team conduct scientifically controlled experiments to precisely measure the ways in which clothing affects mental, physical, and occupational health and well-being. And that's what brings us back to those gloves. As a scientist, one of Choi's strengths is her ability to notice problems that others do not, and then come up with solutions. On a visit to the South Korean countryside, Choi noticed the green stains and painful cracks on the farmers' hands. After analyzing the farmers' work habits and needs, she returned to her laboratory to design a glove suitable for their work. In coming up with the final design, Choi considered a range of factors, from the rate of sweating to worker productivity. The gloves that she and her research team invented are made of a thin, light material that breathes, making it comfortable enough for all-day wear. The fingers of the glove are covered in a material that stops the fingers from slipping. At the same time, the material is thin enough for the farmers to feel what they are doing. Choi and her research group have since patented their invention, and their gloves are worn today by agricultural workers all over South Korea. The gloves have also attracted the attention of those in other professions, including pharmacists who find that the gloves are perfectly suited to their work. Eventually, Choi did marry and have 2 children, but she has hardly been a stay-at-home wife and mother. She has worked as a professor at Seoul National University, published many papers in her field, and has patented a number of inventions.
Passage 2. The father of vaccination.
In a small town in England, in the middle of the 18th century, an 8-year-old boy named Edward Jenner was intentionally infected with a deadly disease. He was then locked in a barn with other children who had been similarly infected. There they remained until they either died or recovered. Fortunately for humanity, Jenner survived. Child abuse? No. Variolation. A common practice in the 18th century, variolation involved deliberately infecting a healthy person with the variola virus that causes a terrible illness, smallpox. To infect the healthy person, doctors would take the pus from a person sick with smallpox and intentionally inject it into the healthy person. Why would a doctor do this? Variolation was the only effective means of fighting smallpox, a deadly disease that was regularly killing between 10 to 20% of the population of Europe at that time. Among children, the death rate was even higher. 1 in 3 infants and children who caught smallpox died. Although almost everyone who was variolated caught the disease, the death rate among variolated children was only about 10% as compared to more than 30% in children who caught the highly contagious disease directly from another person. And most importantly, almost everyone who survived variolation never caught the disease again. It is possible that variolation saved Jenner's life, but he would never forget his terrible days in the barn. Perhaps that is what led him to choose a career in medicine. In 1761, at just 13, Jenner began his medical studies. By 1770, he was studying anatomy and surgery under John Hunter at St. George's Hospital in London. With Hunter, Jenner was trained in the scientific method, which his instructor described simply as, "Why think? Why not try the experiment?" After 2 years in London, Jenner returned to his hometown. He was a popular doctor due to his gentle personality and surgical skill. One common request from his patients was for variolation. Jenner performed the procedure many times, although he used a more humane method than the one that he had suffered through as a child. In his medical practice, Jenner observed something unexpected. A small number of his variolated patients never developed smallpox. Because of his training in the scientific method, he wanted to understand why these particular individuals were able to resist the disease while all others, as expected, contracted a mild to severe case of the deadly disease. He discovered that the variolated patients who did not develop smallpox worked closely with cows and had all previously had cowpox. Cowpox is an illness passed from cows to humans. Jenner observed that some of the symptoms of cowpox and smallpox were similar. However, while cowpox was a mild illness that did not lead to death, smallpox was a severe, life-threatening disease. He was also aware of a common belief that people who had had cowpox never got smallpox. Based on his observations, Jenner came up with a theory. He believed that cowpox not only protected against smallpox, but could be passed from one human being to another as a deliberate means of protection from the disease. In May 1796, Jenner got the chance to test his theory. He learned that a young woman from a local farm, Sarah Nelms, had cowpox. Jenner asked the parents of an 8-year-old boy named James Phipps for permission to conduct an experiment on their son. Jenner chose James because he had never had cowpox or smallpox. Jenner removed pus from Sarah's hand and spread it on scratches he had made on the boy's arms. As expected, the boy developed cowpox, but recovered rapidly. Jenner was now ready for the second, riskier stage of his experiment. On July 1st, 1796, Jenner variolated Phipps with pus from a smallpox patient. Jenner and other scientists and physicians waited anxiously for the results. In fact, James Phipps never caught smallpox. This was clear evidence to support Jenner's theory, but more data were needed. Jenner experimented successfully on 13 more patients and, at the end of 1796, wrote a report describing his work for the Royal Society. However, it was turned down for publication. According to those who reviewed it, Jenner's theory was too much of a challenge to the accepted medical beliefs of the time. Jenner ignored the criticism and continued experimenting. In 1798, he published his own book based on 23 cases in which vaccination, named for the vaccinia virus of cowpox, resulted in lasting protection against or immunity to smallpox. Although many people continued to criticize Jenner, some well-known London physicians were starting to vaccinate their patients. By the beginning of the 19th century, the practice of vaccination had spread throughout the world. Eventually, Jenner's contributions to science were formally recognized. However, he never made an attempt to get rich through his discovery. Instead, he spent much of his time working without pay to spread the good news about vaccination. In 1977, the last known victim of smallpox recovered. No new cases appeared, and in 1980, the World Health Assembly announced that the world and its peoples were free of smallpox.
Passage 3. A Nose for Science.
In 1791, Marie Antoinette escaped Paris with her husband, Louis XVI. Dressed as simple travelers, they left for Austria. But before they arrived, they were caught. How? The legend says that when the queen stepped down from her carriage in a cloud of expensive perfume, everyone knew she must be royalty. No ordinary person could afford to wear anything that smelled so heavenly. The queen eventually paid for the mistake with her life. This is just one of the many perfume tales that scientist Luca Turin enjoys telling. Turin is a biophysicist with an unusual hobby, collecting perfume. Turin has been obsessed by smell since he was a boy, and he used to entertain himself by analyzing the scents of wild plants. He has an unusually sensitive nose and is very good at identifying different scents. Turin describes his excellent sense of smell in this way. Every perfume I've ever smelled has been to me like a movie, sound and vision. To me, smell is just as real as they are. When he was a young scientific researcher in Nice, France, Turin frequently visited local perfume shops, collecting rare fragrances. He was well known for his ability to smell a perfume and analyze it, immediately identifying the individual scents that it contained. As he added to his perfume collection, Turin was also progressing in his scientific career. Although trained as a biologist, he considered the division of science into separate fields, biology, chemistry, and physics, to be artificial. He moved freely from one field to another, following a path determined only by his interest and intellect. In that way, he gained a wider range of knowledge than most scientists possess. At the same time, Turin's fascination with perfume grew. One day, he and some friends visited a large discount perfume store where Turin bought almost everything on the shelves. On the way home, he entertained his friends by describing the fragrances in language that was so poetic that they told him he should write a book. He decided to do exactly that. In 1992, Turin's book was published as Parfum, le Guide, or Perfume, the Guide. In it, Turin skillfully critiques some of the world's most famous fragrances. For example, this is how he describes Rush by Gucci. It smells like an infant's breath, mixed with his mother's hairspray. What Rush can do, as all great art does, is create a yearning, then fill it with false memories of an invented past. Turin's book was extremely popular among the secretive big boys, the 7 large companies that control the world scent market. Turin's talent at translating smell into words won him a rare invitation to visit their laboratories. There, Turin discovered that the widely accepted theory about how we are able to identify particular smells by the shape of their molecules did not seem to work. Under this theory, it should be fairly easy for a chemist to build new molecules and accurately predict what they will smell like. But in fact, this is not the case. Each new smell the big boys create involves an investment of millions of dollars. That is because only a very small percentage of the new molecules possess the desired fragrance. Now Turin had a new obsession: solving the mystery of smell. As a scientist with an extremely sensitive nose, an obsession with perfume, access to the big boys' laboratories, and a wide range of scientific knowledge, he was particularly well suited to the challenge. Within just 3 years, Turin believed that he had the answer. The key was not the shape of the molecules, but rather their vibrations. Turin sent a paper presenting his theory to a prestigious science journal and waited anxiously for a response. However, a few scientific reviewers recommended that the journal turn the paper down. Scientists who had based their careers on the old theory of smell also reacted negatively, and he was even accused of fraud, an accusation that turned out to be false. What is Turin's explanation for this negative reaction from some in the scientific community? First of all, he is sharply critical of the standards for publication in science journals. He argues that the reviewers turned his paper down due to their narrow focus on just one field of science. Therefore, they couldn't make sense out of a complex theory involving biology, chemistry, and physics. He also believes that scientists do not have enough time to write scientific reviews. In an interview in 2013, Turin said, "These days, people have 900 emails per day. How much time is there to read, to think, to review a paper?" Reviewing papers? Honestly, all of us have better things to do. But of course, you have to do it, so the standard of review now is really, really low. However, Turin has not given up on his theory, nor have many in the scientific community. Although his ideas remain controversial, he has continued to research and publish scientific papers. For 9 years, he used his theory to create scent molecules to sell to companies that use scent in their products. He has also worked as a visiting professor at prestigious American and international universities and research institutes. He has conducted research for the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, a U.S. government agency, on an artificial nose that would be much more sensitive than the human nose. Such a nose could be used in a wide range of fields, including medicine, where it could be used to identify cancer cells. Turin's interest in the art of scent also remains strong. In 2006, he published a book about his work, The Secret of Scent: Adventures in Perfume and the Science of Smell. In 2008, he and his wife, Tanya Sanchez, wrote another guide to perfume titled Perfumes: The A to Z Guide, which received excellent critical reviews in prestigious American and British publications.